But first, I'd like to give a few reasons for why I'm sharing my testimony now, 23 years later. For one, I couldn't bring myself to do it until now. I'm still not sure I can do it. I've questioned it 1,000 times, especially the last 2 days or so. Why now? 23 years later, I feel like most people have heard our story many times and are like, okay, let's get past that. But I need to be obedient. So, and I promise I'm going to try not to cry through the whole thing. Second, and to me the most important, with everything that is in me, I want you to know and experience Jesus the way I have. Not necessarily through the suffering that I've been through. I don't want that for you. But whatever it takes, and for us it has taken suffering, but whatever it takes, I want people to know him. Third, I don't want people to hear our story and feel sorry for us. Honestly, parts of our story are awful and unbearable, but God. That's our thing, but God. I want people to hear our story and know what a true miracle it is that we are where we are today, and that Jeffrey is the preacher and the pastor that he is today because of God. Now, I'm certainly not saying that we have it all together at this moment. Many of you who know us well know that that is way far from the truth. But it's all because of Jesus, and that's who I want you to see tonight. I don't want you to see me. I don't want you to see Jeff. I just want you to see Jesus. And I'll probably go back and forth calling him Jeffrey and Jeff. Jeffrey is what I call him, but I know most people call him Jeff. So to start, I want to tell you how I met my Jesus. I was blessed to grow up in a home with very loving parents. My mom played the piano at church, and we were there every time the doors were open. Every time. I attended kids camp at the Baptist encampment in Alto when I was around 10 years old. One night during the sermon, I seemed to really get what they were talking about. I knew that Jesus came to save me from my sins, and that if I believed that I would not go to hell. My parents and family were super excited when I told them, and I was baptized soon after that camp. Throughout junior high and high school, I continued going to church and had the blessing of being taught Sunday school and training union, if any of y'all know what that is, on Sunday nights by my grandmother. She would teach me Sunday school, and my cousin, who I call Aunt, would teach me training union. These were usually one-on-one classes because our church was very, very small. So by the time I was in high school, I was like the only one under 40 at our church. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. Those moments with my grandmother and my aunt are moments that I cherish. Throughout high school, I definitely strayed many, many times. But I continue to remember the decision that I had made at the encampment, and, that would constantly come back to me. But Jeffrey and I started dating when I was 14, and I would often come to church with him, and this was also a huge blessing. To me, it was a huge church. Like, I just thought it was the biggest thing ever, and for it to actually be able to go to, like, a youth group with other teenagers was really cool to me. And they just accepted me like one of them, So throughout these times, I would have doubts from time to time about my salvation. I can remember in the old sanctuary just sitting and listening to different preachers and struggling with, well, am I saved? Like, am I really saved? I don't know. Like, I believe Jesus died for me, and I don't think I'm going to hell, but I don't know. And so I'm going to fast forward to attending camp at Dry Creek. Jeffrey and I had not been married very long when he became the youth minister here. A man named Ken Freeman was the camp evangelist, and he was wild. I don't know if you've ever heard him, but he just like in your face, wild and crazy. And we just fell in love with him. Like, he had a cross shaved in the back of his hair, and so like at camp, we did it to Jeffrey when he had hair. And so he came back with the cross shaved in the back of his head. Anyway, it was really cool. But during one of the evening services, he gave us a test. And he said, if you say no to one of these questions, then you failed the test and you don't really have a true relationship with Jesus. Well, I don't think I even made it to number 2 when I started feeling the Holy Spirit move. Really shout to me, you failed. Marty, you're failing this test. You are failing. I knew who Jesus was, but I didn't really know him and have a relationship with him. Well, Brother Ken started the invitation, and honestly, I stood up before he even asked people who made a decision to stand up. Jeffrey was so confused, like I could see him like looking at me like, sit down, what are you doing? I was like, and then he was like, oh, well, she must be standing by one of the youth. Like, he couldn't see like who was around me. He just was like, why is she standing up? Come to find out, I had just gotten saved. Truly met Jesus face to face for the very first time. I remember calling my parents super excited. My daddy was very skeptical. You just had to know my dad, but he kept saying, you were already saved. Like, what do you mean you got saved tonight? Like, you were already baptized. We've already done this, you know. Did the evangelist talk you into this? Like, my daddy was super protective of his little girls, and he just wanted to make sure that what I had been feeling and learning all week was truth and not false doctrine. Even after coming home and talking to him, we finally just decided that either way, if I got saved when I was 10, great. If it was when I was 18, great, because either way, without a doubt, I knew Jesus. I can honestly say I have not wrestled with doubting my salvation since then. Like, truly knowing that I know Jesus. I have not doubted that since then. I'm not saying I haven't wrestled. Oh boy, have I. But I've never felt like I didn't know Jesus or that he didn't know me. So that's like the quick version of my salvation experience, but I had to share that because obviously that's the foundation of my life from that point forward, and praise the Lord for that. So this is our story of loss. We both firmly believe it is meant for our good and to bring God glory. I'm not saying we fully understand it even still, but we both fully trust God and know after studying his word and talking with him that it is the purpose for our suffering. Even if you haven't lost a child or someone close to you, I still feel God can use my testimony to encourage you in whatever suffering you may go through. I've said many times, especially in Sunday school, like they know that I always say comparison is of the devil. I truly believe that. Comparison is of the devil. Don't compare your suffering with someone else's suffering. Whatever suffering you're going through right now is hard for you, whatever it is. Whether it's losing someone, whether it's health problems, financial difficulties, confusion in your soul, or just whatever the suffering is, it's hard. Wherever you are in your life right now, it's hard, whatever kind of suffering it is. And I know there are many of you who could stand up and give your testimony, and you have been through things that I cannot even imagine, and you still stand and say that Jesus is our Savior. Like, I can look out and know that many of you have suffered hard times, and you know what suffering is. Whatever the suffering is for you or for me, the answer for the suffering is the same, and that's Jesus. Here's the story of our first child, Hillary. I have a picture of her that I'd like to show. There she is. Dark brown eyes, just like her daddy. And she had dark hair, and she was tiny. Her name was Hillary Noble Thomas. My maiden name was Hill. That's where we got Hillary. And then Noble is my sister's middle name. So her name had lots of meaning. I can tell you that I've told this story 1,000,000 times. And I can do the short, condensed version without shedding a tear. Kind of gotten not good at it, but I can do it. I just don't think. I just tell it, and that's it. Tonight, I would like to get a little more personal. Actually, I would not like to get a little more personal. Actually, I would like to run out of here and go hide in the corner. And I said, like, as I'm trying to type this, there's this heavy feeling sitting on my chest and a lump in my throat. But I want to be obedient. So I do want to share more tonight than I have ever shared before. I can't look at some of you. Okay. So as I kind of said earlier, Jeffrey and I were married super young. He had just turned 19, and I was 17. Y'all can't do that. So, Francie's already 21, but Katie, you can't do that either. We were both attending college, and we're definitely not ready for kids. I mean, we were kids ourselves. Like, we were like the hangout place. All the high school kids would come hang out because we were their age. So, even though we both knew that we did want kids at some point, I wanted a lot of kids. And Jeffrey, he agreed with me sooner or later. So, eventually he did. We always laugh and say, like, I love babies. Y'all know that. And, like, I love babies. And he does good with teenagers. So I was always like, I'll take care of the babies, and then when they grow up, they're yours. So right now, they're all his. But so Jeffrey was in his next to last semester of college, and I was in my reading block, is what they used to call it in elementary education. And we found out we were going to have a baby. And we had planned to wait until we were out of school, but regardless, we were super excited. We didn't find out if it was a boy or a girl. We just thought that'd be fun to be surprised. So the day came for Hillary to arrive. My mom went with me to my doctor appointment on June the 10th. I thought I was in early labor, but since it was my first, I didn't really know how that all worked. And so when I got to the doctor's office, my doctor kind of seemed to lose it and start panicking. And he was like, oh, my goodness, you just got to go to the hospital right now. You're having this baby. And Jeffrey was in the middle of taking a final. Like, he was taking a final. And so I paged him. Kids, I know what that is. He did not have a cell phone. He had a pager. So I paged him, and he had to get up during the test and go tell his professor, look, I can't finish this test. My wife is about to have a baby. And she was very kind, and she let him leave. The doctor was right. The baby was coming, but she wasn't coming anytime soon. So it was a very, very difficult labor. But I will never forget her arrival. The doctor said, it's a girl. We were in shock. You know that everybody tries to guess what you're having, especially if you don't know, and everybody thought it was a boy. I mean, we'd have strangers come up to us and say, oh, you know, by the way you're carrying it, it's a boy or whatever. And when he said it's a girl, I literally heard the grandmas screaming, it's a girl. We were at North Monroe Hospital, and they had their ear pressed up against the door, and they heard the doctor say, it's a girl. And everybody was just so excited. It's the first grandbaby on either side of the family, a perfectly healthy baby girl. And man, was she spoiled. Her Uncle John was into photography at the time, and he must have taken literally 1,000,000 pictures of her, and he bought her outfits for each picture. He thought she had to have a new outfit every time. He and Dawn came over daily to love on her, as well as the proud grandparents. We weren't sure who would keep her when we had to go back to school in August, but when the time came, my 80-something at the time grandmother, my mama is what I called her, stepped up to the plate, and that was such a blessing. She drove from Mangum daily to keep Hillary. We went for normal checkups, and everything was great. Hillary was 6 pounds, 10 ounces at birth, and she continued to grow, but at the same time, she was tiny, but that wasn't surprising to anyone. Jeffrey and I are not the biggest people. And so in August, I started my last block, professional block is what they used to call it, but before I started student teaching, and Jeffrey took a job coaching and teaching English at Riverfield. He resigned from youth ministry due to this new full-time role as coach and teacher. But we remained very involved at church here. Halloween rolled around, and I dressed Hillary up as the prettiest angel you ever did see for the fall festival, of course. And this was the Saturday before Halloween. Halloween night, Riverfield had a little carnival-type thing, and we went to that. And everybody just oohed and awed over Hillary. She was the center of attention at church, at school, everywhere. At home, the grandparents, everywhere. While we were out, we noticed one of Hillary's eyes was jumping. Not like a nerve, not like that twitch you get in your eye, but her entire eye was jumping. And so we were scheduled for a doctor appointment the beginning of the next week anyway. Dr. Malmay was our pediatrician, as well as a very close family friend. And he had started to get concerned about her not gaining weight. Again, she was tiny, and so and she had started spitting up a good bit more than normal. So we were headed to see Dr. Malmay anyway. When we got there, we talked about her lack of weight gain and her spitting up, and we pointed the eye out to him. He was concerned and told us he felt like we should get some tests run to find out what was going on. Hillary was admitted to the hospital. We were concerned, but not just crazy worried. We had full confidence that Dr. Malmay was going to get to the bottom of it and figure out what was going on, and we were going to get her fixed. So when we got to the hospital, they began running all types of tests. They did blood work, x-rays. It felt like they did every kind of test you can think of. Nothing showed up. Just normal. Everything was normal. So I will add that through all of this, Hillary was still the best baby. I mean, easygoing, not real fussy, just a happy baby. So Dr. Malmay finally decided to get an MRI done. At this point, we had started to worry. We had no clue what could be wrong. After all, she seemed perfectly healthy other than being tiny and her eye jumping. But she was doing everything a 4-month-old baby should do. Well, Hillary had to be sedated for the MRI, and as a mom, that is awful to watch. And so I so wanted to trade places with her. But I knew we had to find out what was going on. So they took her in for the MRI. Miss Pat, my mom and dad, and Jeffrey and I sat in a small MRI waiting room by ourselves as they did the test. Before the test was completely finished, Dr. Malmay came in. He could hardly speak. He asked Jeffrey and I to come with him. He said this was not normal procedure. They didn't usually let people come in. But because he loved us so much and we were like family to him, he wanted to do this. Hillary was still in the MRI machine at the time, and he took us in to where the computer screens were. I don't know how it is now, but this is back in the 90s, you know. So he took us in to where the computer screens were. On the screen, he pointed out to us a very, very large tumor. I remember just standing there in shock. It felt like I was in a nightmare, and it was like time just stood still. Here we were in our early 20s with a perfectly healthy, precious baby girl, and you're telling us there's a huge tumor growing inside of her skull? I just remember being silent and then having to go to the waiting room to tell our parents. It was awful. Absolutely awful. As I go from this point forward, I do wish my testimony was different. And that's one reason I'm sharing my testimony, because if you ever go through suffering, I want your testimony to be different than mine. I want you to hold on to Jesus like you have never held on before. I want you to read his word, and I just want you to stay with him. That's not what we did. I wish I could say we just leaned on the Lord and we prayed and we read his word and we sought his wisdom I have seen and heard testimonies of people who have lost a child, and that is their testimony, and it just amazes me. That's not our testimony, but God. Okay, so Hillary has a brain tumor. Now what? What I can tell you is, even though Jeffrey and I weren't necessarily seeking the Lord, everyone around us was. Our community was. Richland Parish, like all of Richland Parish, came together and prayed like never before. Like this was before social media, but the word spread quickly. Because like I said, she was a very much loved baby. So people were praying. I mean, I could give you a list of people who prayed over us and for us. Dr. Malmay called in Dr. Bermudez, a neurosurgeon. Some of you may have heard of him. He's not known for his bedside manner, but he is a very good doctor. And he met with us, only Jeffrey and myself. He would not meet with the grandparents, which honestly terrified us because we were kids. Like, I felt like we didn't know what to tell him. Like, why are you giving us all this decision? But he would only meet with us, and he would not let any other family members in. He explained to us that the tumor was more than likely there before birth, and he also explained that because a newborn skull is still soft, that her skull had just grown with the tumor, which was a blessing because that's why she never hurt. She was never in pain. One reason why we didn't know, because she wasn't hurting. And so we consider that a blessing. Dr. Bermudez gave us the option of going to St. Jude's, or he could perform the surgery to try and remove the tumor. He was very honest with us and basically told us either way he really didn't know if she would make it, even if we went to St. Jude's, if we stayed here. Again, I don't really know why we didn't take the St. Jude's route, but at the time that just didn't seem what was best for Hillary and best for us. Again, when you look back, you have 1,000 questions. Should I have done this? Should I have done that? But we just have to trust God. And so we stayed in Monroe. And for Dr. Bermudez was going to do the surgery. And he really felt like he could get most of the tumor. He was very straightforward with us and never sugarcoated anything. He definitely told us there was a risk of losing her, but if the tumor didn't come out, she most likely wouldn't make it much longer. It was big and growing at a rapid rate. We had been at the hospital since the day we brought Hillary in, which had really only been a few days. Like, again, her eye was jumping on Halloween. This is the first week of November. All this is happening. We were exhausted. The day before the surgery, we videoed Hillary in the hospital bed in PICU. I wish I could show you, but I can't because I can't even watch it still. But we were playing pee-pie over the side of the bed, and I'm telling y'all, she would laugh, the biggest laugh you have ever heard a 4-month-old laugh. And again, I still have that video, but neither one of us can bring ourselves to watch it. But everyone talked us into going home to sleep the night before the surgery, so we did. I don't think we slept at all, but we did go home. I remember just laying there. I remember, like, us talking and saying, well, we should pray. But, like, neither one of us could pray. It was like, we should really, like, I remember us looking at each other like, we should really be praying about this, but it was like we didn't know how to pray. We didn't even know what to say. And when I think of this night and the days and months that followed, I always think of Romans 8:26. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. I have held on to that verse so many times I can't even explain it, because there are just times when you don't have anything to pray. Like, it just won't come out. And God knows that. And so this was me. Like, I had no words. I never felt like God left me, but I also had no words to say to him. So Dr. Bermudez performed the surgery and removed most of the tumor. The next few hours and days would be crucial, and this was on November the 4th. She never woke up from the surgery. Her brain began swelling, and they couldn't stop it. I remember having to go in and tell them that they could turn off the machines. It still doesn't feel real when I think about it. It's all just a blur. I remember going out, and John and Dawn were there, and they had been with us throughout the whole thing. After all, Hillary was practically theirs too. And we just cried and cried and cried. And I'd always been extremely close to my parents. Those of you who know me know that. I was always close to my parents. But in these moments, we couldn't be. Because you see, losing a grandchild is a pain I can't even understand. Mama and Daddy were my protectors, always were my protectors. And they had always tried to fix every single problem I ever had, but they couldn't fix this, no matter how much they wanted to. So they themselves were going through a tremendous amount of grief themselves. We had an unbelievable nurse throughout all of this. Her name is Kathy O'Neill. I don't know if anyone knows her, and I haven't talked to her in years, but I will never, ever forget her. God absolutely placed her in our path. She was a believer, and she comforted us through these awful events. After Miss Kathy unhooked Hillary from the machines and bathed her, they allowed us to go back in the room and hold her one last time. The room was empty and quiet. I sat in a rocking chair, and they placed her in my arms. I will never be able to adequately put this into words. My heart was numb and empty. But there was an absolute presence in the room that Jeffrey or I can neither one describe. It was God and his angels. It was real. It was comforting and calming. Our life was shattered, but in this moment, there was a peace like I have never, ever felt before. I do not want anyone to ever have to experience the loss that we endured, but at the same time, I wish everyone could feel the presence of God like we did in that moment. This is something I have clung through my deepest, darkest moments. Before we left the hospital, Dr. Bermudez met with us one last time. Again, he was very straightforward, but loving at the same time. He loved us, like there was no doubt he loved us. And he told us that he wanted us to know that the days ahead were going to be very difficult. He told us something like 90% of marriages that lost a first child ended in divorce. We were like, oh, well, thanks for telling us that, but that's not going to be us. Like, we just laughed it off and said, that's not going to be us. No, you don't have to worry about that, Dr. Bermudez. We have each other, and we're going to hold on to each other. Again, I wish that was our testimony, but it isn't. So we went through the visitation. So many people came to show their love and support. We went through the funeral. Mr. Wang sang a song by, it was by Alabama at the time, called Angels Among Us, and it was perfect. Our principal, Jeff's boss at the time, Mr. Metter, who's also my principal when I was in school, he wrote a poem for Hillary, and it was entitled The Littlest Angel. And even at her grave, she has a marker that says The Littlest Angel. I became a bit obsessed with angels. If you've ever been to my house, I still love angels. But some people even worried that maybe I was worshiping angels, but I had not. I studied angels during this time. Billy Graham has an amazing book about angels. I studied angels during this time, and I knew that Hillary was not transformed into an angel. Angels are completely different beings than we are. Like, that's not how that works. And so I knew this, but I also knew that as we sat in that room and held her for the very last time, that the room was filled with God's heavenly angels as well as his presence. He had sent them to comfort us, and I could not let go of that experience, and I still can't. That's why I've probably never told my kids. They're always like, wow, we have all these angels in our house. again, that is the part of the experience that got me through the coming months. We made it through Christmas. Again, she died in November, so we had to go through Christmas, and it was awful, awful, awful. We got pictures in the mail that we had just taken, like, at Walmart, with their little Santa Claus hat on, and pictures that we were supposed to be giving out to everybody, just as gifts, and we didn't give them out. We just cried over them. We gathered together as a family and tried to survive the holiday. I graduated in December from NLU, and it was supposed to be a happy time. It wasn't. I have pictures from the day, and we're all smiling. But when you look past the smiles, every one of us just looked pale and empty. I took a job teaching 3rd grade at Rayville Elementary. I started in January. I took it so that I would stay busy and I wouldn't have to think. I'm sure I was a terrible teacher. I really probably was. But the love of those kids was very special to me. I see them every now and then, and they haven't forgotten me, and that was a long time ago. I was numb and sad, and I just cried a lot, like all the time, really. Jeffrey and I couldn't communicate with each other. He was tired of my crying, and I was tired of him being mad. So around February or so, and I'm going to stop right here and just say, I love that man. And I just want you to know how God has worked in him and in me. I'm not picking on him. And he has told this in different youth groups and stuff, but we've never really told it in front of a huge crowd. So here goes. So around February or so, he started acting differently. Got himself a new truck, and he got a new haircut, and he was just Mr. Cool, And he would stay at the school a lot. And I was still just sitting in the corner and crying, taking Xanax, honestly, and just numbing out to the reality of our loss. I remember he came in one evening and said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce. I went nuts. It's like completely psycho. I said, no, I am not giving you a divorce, and you are not leaving me. I don't care if you hate me or not. You're not going anywhere. We're just going to be stuck in this house miserable. Whatever. You're just not giving me, I'm not going to divorce you. I was like, this is not happening. Well, that was pretty much the last conversation we had for a few months. He didn't leave the house, but in those few months, you could almost say it was like divorced. He would stay gone until very late at night, or he wouldn't come home at all. And again, I don't want you to think, oh, Jeffrey's so awful. And poor Marty, you've got to know that I was consumed by grief. I was not being a wife to my husband. I just cried. Like, that's it. That's all I would do was just cry or just sit and just stare. There was, like, no conversation between us. And when Jeffrey looked at me, there was not an ounce of love in his eyes. He was just angry and bitter. He was angry at God. He was angry at me. He was angry at everybody. And I was just empty. Like, I just was empty. I had no words for him. I couldn't help him. I had nothing. I just was empty. I had no love to give him back. Like, as much as he looked at me like he couldn't stand me, I just looked empty at him. I didn't have anything for him either. Like, we just were empty. Like I said, Jeffrey would stay gone until all hours of the night. And he became friends with his students and started hanging out with them just to escape being an adult, because we had found out being an adult was not very much fun, and we didn't want any part of it. So he just decided he's just going to be one of the teenagers. And so he would be gone, and I would just sit in that house and go crazy, like literally crazy. I would go, y'all are going to think I'm crazy. I get this stuff you see on the movies or whatever. Like, I would go up to the school in the middle of the night, and I would just sit outside the gym to see if he was really at the gym. Or I would get out and I'd go put my ear to the coach's office door, like to see who he was really talking to or to see if he was really in there. And I would drive around Rayville like at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I would just hit my head up against the steering wheel and just beg God to let me have a wreck. Like, just take me out. I really did just want to die. Like, some people talk about, well, like Jeffrey, I know we've talked many times, and he's like, well, I've never gotten to the point where I wanted to commit suicide. Like, he just wanted to run away or whatever. But on these nights, that's where I was. I just wanted to die. Just take me. Like, I don't want to be here. And so I would just hit my hand on the steering wheel and just pray that I'd run off the road. But I didn't. I would, like, stalk him. And, like, if he'd go to a restaurant in Rayville, I'd, like, show up and be there. And he would, like, completely ignore me. And there was this mom there who we ended up naming Francie after, Miss Frances Robinson from Delhi. And she just kind of took us in. Like, she didn't give Jeffrey the pity party, which he hates. And so she didn't do that to him. But at the same time, she wouldn't completely block me out, which is what some people would do who were around him. She would kind of let me in just enough to where he wouldn't get mad, but I'd still get in just a little bit. So I thank God for her. But like I said, Jeffrey was just done. He was just done with me. He was done with church, for sure. He was done with God. And during all of this, we had pretty much stopped going to church. It was just too hard. Church was just too hard. I can't even explain. It just, you know, I mean, and everybody means well, like that's what you need. You need their prayers and their hugs and all that, but then you, like, don't want that. Like, you're just mad and you don't get that. And so we were just kind of done. And but so one night, during all this, I decided I'm going to church. I don't know, he can just give up on God if he wants to. I'm going to church. And so it was so hard to go all by myself because I knew everybody was going to say, well, where's Jeffrey? How's he doing? Are y'all doing okay? You know, is everything all right? And but I did. I was like, I'm going to church. I walked in. It was in the old sanctuary again. And I was a complete hour late. Like, church was over. Everybody was getting up to leave. Like, and I didn't even know. Like, I felt so stupid. And I felt like everybody was just looking at me like, oh, poor Marty. Like, she don't, bless her heart. Yeah, like, bless her heart. And, like, it was just awful. Like, I just got in the car and cried the whole way home because I just couldn't even function. Like I said, I didn't even know what time church was. And then I just showed up a whole hour late. And, if I wasn't stalking Jeffrey, I was at John and Dawn's house all the time. Like, I'm surprised they didn't, like, kick me out. I'd either go to John and Dawn's, or if they weren't there for some reason, Stacy and Jimmy Gandy, my cousins, lived a block away also. We were all three within the block of each other, and I would just go to their house. And then Mr. Larry and Miss Beth, I think they would probably just watch and be like, we got to watch that girl. Like, she's crazy. We just got to love her and take care of her. And they would, like, if I called and I got scared by myself, Mr. Larry would come and, like, take care of me. And so God surrounded us with people who would take care of us. You know, again, John and Dawn, like, Dawn knew everything that was going on, so when I would go over, she wouldn't give me the, oh, how are y'all? Well, where's Jeffrey? We just talk about nothing, just unimportant stuff. And so it would just get me through the nights or the days. And so Jeffrey continued rebelling, and I got desperate. I started calling people to see if somebody would come. Anybody, please come talk to Jeffrey and talk some sense into him. Our pastor at the time was Brother Julius Russell, and he had been through a good bit of suffering in his life, and so he came to the house, and he sat us down and talked to us. And Ken Freeman, who I talked about earlier, the wild and crazy man, he's from Texas, but he drove in and had lunch with Jeffrey one day. And then I called Brother Lee Thomas, who used to pastor here, and he drove from Westlake. And I called Brother Lee without Jeffrey knowing. And he came from Westlake to talk to Jeffrey. But none of it seemed to get through to him. So the next part I'm going to share is his side of the story, but I have to share it. It was probably around the end of April or the beginning of May, and he was playing ball, of course, in the middle of the night, one night at the gym. And honestly, I was probably driving around Rayville and stalking his truck or whatever I did. And he was shooting the ball, and he went to rebound, and he fell to the floor. And Jeffrey shouted out, "God, what are you doing?" He says God spoke and said, "I've got you right where I want you, on the floor and broken. Stop running from me." Jeffrey said he started praying. For the very first time since Hillary died, he started praying. He came straight home. Again, it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning and woke me up. I thought something was wrong because he never, ever woke me up when he got home, if he came home. And so right there, he apologized, and he asked me to forgive him, and he promised to stay, and he promised we would work through it all. Now, I would like to say that it's all sunshine and roses after that, but that's not life. That's not reality for us. We didn't even know how to talk to each other anymore. We didn't trust each other at all. Like, I didn't trust him at all. I never knew where he was or who he was with. And so that was something that we had to learn how to do again. And we had the opportunity to go see my sister, who at the time lived in Washington, D.C., and since we were both teaching, we had the summer off. So we went to D.C. for a little more than 3 weeks during the month of June. And I really feel like this was a huge part of the healing process in our marriage. We were able to get away from everyone and just spend time with each other. We began reading the Bible again and talking about God, and we became closer and closer. We still hurt tremendously from losing our daughter, but God began to heal our relationship. I tell you all of this because I want you to know that whatever suffering you are going through, God can get you through it. One of the miracles to me is that 23 years later, God is using our story, and our story is not one of obedience and faith. We completely failed, like we completely lost it, and yet God did not give up on us. He had us the whole time, and we didn't even recognize it. In Isaiah 43, 1 and 2, it says, "But now, this is what the Lord says, He who created you, Jacob, He who formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by my name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." I'll say there have been many times that I've absolutely felt like I was drowning in the waters. But I have learned that it can't be about what I feel. It has to be about what I know, and I know I am His. I know we're almost out of time, and I tried to condense it all, but I just can't go on and finish without just touching on the loss of my parents, because like I said, I was so close to my parents. The loss of my daddy was very difficult, but my mama shielded it from us, the very hard parts. So it wasn't until the very last few days of his life that we knew how bad it was. My daddy had always been there. He had always been everything to me. And to see him so weak was heartbreaking. He and I were very much alike. He was a man of very few words, but he loved deeply. Even if he wasn't much of a hugger, which is like a heel trait. We're not much of huggers, but we knew without a doubt that he loved us. And one thing he knew was the Bible. He read the Bible daily and was so full of wisdom from doing this. In the last few hours of his life, my mom was exhausted. She had been taking care of him around the clock, and her heart was breaking. So I was left in charge of administering the morphine and taking care of Daddy. And the only thing that got me through it was a conversation I had had with my daddy a few days earlier. Again, he was a man of few words, so when he talked, we listened. And he told me that he had been talking to the Lord, and he told me that he was ready. that no matter the outcome of it all, he and the Lord were good. And knowing that gave me the strength I needed to watch him take his last breath. Now, losing my mama was somewhat different. Jeffrey agreed that we could move in and help take care of her. I knew this would impact my family deeply, and it did. But I still wouldn't change it. She passed away 3 years after my daddy died. These were 3 very hard years. She was in poor health, and more than that, she had lost her soulmate. She and Daddy had a relationship like very few people I know. They loved each other with everything that they had. So when she lost him, she felt like she lost everything. At the end of the 3 years, we were all exhausted. Me, Jeffrey, Mama, my kids, everybody. It was so hard taking care of my family and my mom, but I can say that the only thing that got me through those 3 years was my Savior. This is the opposite testimony from Hillary. With my mom, I dug into the Bible like I had never done before. It's when I really started putting up those scriptures Jeffrey always talks about around the house, because it was the only thing that would get me through each minute of the day. I was so tired, and the verse that I clung to was Exodus 14:14. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. I was too tired to fight for anything, for my family, for my mom. I just had to rest in knowing that the Lord was going to see me through, and he did. The last moments of my mom's life were some of the hardest moments I have ever endured. Because of the medicine she was on, she just wasn't herself, so I felt like we didn't get to really say goodbye. Also, she was my best friend in the whole world. I was quiet like my daddy, so since birth, my mama would talk for me. Y'all know those kids who just hide behind their mama's leg? That was me. And even though I was now a grown woman with children of my own, I really didn't think I could survive without her. And even through losing her, I have fought the feelings of anger and bitterness in losing my parents. But my God has seen me through. Through losing my daughter and losing my parents, I have found one thing to be true. The only thing, and I mean the only thing that matters in this life is what you do with Jesus. I have told my 2 older kids, especially as they've gone through the teenage years, and I will continue telling my other 2 kids many times that in those last moments of your life, those very last moments, as I watched my daughter and my daddy and my mama pass from this life to the next, I have witnessed, and I know without a doubt that the only thing that matters is Jesus. Sometimes Francie gets a little aggravated with me, and she's like, well, you know the Bible so well. You're like, she holds me up here, and I'm like, you're crazy. Like, I don't have it all together. Like, she sees me struggle at the same time, and I'm like, I don't know the Bible, and I'm definitely not a Bible scholar. I still have so much to learn, but I know that the only thing that matters is Jesus. We're reading a book in our Sunday school class, and it has gone right in line with Jeffrey's series on suffering. And one thing that we have learned is that sometimes it takes us becoming dust through brokenness and suffering to become who God wants us to be. We've often laughed and said, oh my goodness, we are some hard-headed people because it has taken a lot to get our attention. But in the book, Lisa Turker says, and when mixed with water, dust becomes clay. Clay, when placed in the potter's hands, can be formed into anything the potter dreams up. In Isaiah 64:8, the Bible says, yet you, Lord, are our Father. We are the clay. You are the potter. We are all the work of your hand. God often has to break us down to dust through suffering for us to become who he wants us to be. I have learned through all of my sufferings that my hope is tied to the unchanging promise of God. I hope for the good I know God will ultimately bring, whether the good turns out to match my desires or not. Losing these loved ones was definitely not the outcome I wanted, but I am so thankful that God has worked it all together for my good and for his glory. And again, please know, we still have a very, very long way to go. I have moments when the heartbreak of losing these people is so bad that I can hardly catch my breath. Like, I don't want you to think this is easy or that I'm over it or whatever, obviously. But there are days when it's just so hard. We still have struggles. Jeffrey and I, daily struggles, and that are super hard. I mean, we're raising teenagers, and it's just, life is hard. It's so hard. And some days I feel like I can't survive the struggles of this life, but I have no doubt I would not be able to survive if I did not have the hope of Jesus to hold on to. In his word and his presence, that's what I hold on to. So that's kind of my story. Up to now.